Well, hello everybody, and congratulations. You're getting really close. Today we're gonna look at dyslexia, and what I'm sharing is really largely based upon the Dyslexia Handbook that Texas Education Agency publishes, and this is what they want you to know about. Have any of you taken your language arts core subjects test yet? How many of you have taken it? Okay, just a few of you. So there's information on here that will come up on that exam. I feel very, very certain, based upon the competencies that kind of guide the test items. And but also, even if you've already taken the exam and you passed it, this is really important information to know because you're going to be teaching and you'll be in schools and classrooms, and you're going to have some children likely that are struggling in reading, and you're going to want to know, what do I do? How do I help this child? What's the policy, and so on. And it's changed slightly. So there was one handbook that was published, and then a few years later they came out with another one. So they kind of they made some changes. So that's what we're going to look at. And then there's some things here that I've added to what they have talked about, just to kind of elaborate a little bit upon concepts. I'm not going to say that after this presentation you're going to feel like, oh, I know everything about this. But Dr. Collins can send you the PowerPoint, and I also can send her the link to give her a copy of the actual handbook so that you have that and you can look at it. So, all right. Oh, okay, you can go ahead and do this. Okay, that's good. Okay. Okay, so again, this is the revised handbook from the Texas Education Agency. You can download this yourself and get a copy, but we are also going to be making this available. And when we talk about dyslexia, there's actual state and federal laws that undergird what we're talking about. So these things are not optional in terms of what the policies are, and the state feels very, very concerned about it. And in fact, that's why we're being required to make sure you are exposed to this information. The state feels like I said, the state feels like it's very, very important. So when you look at the handbook, there's some chapters in there, and one of them will talk about the definitions and characteristics of dyslexia, procedures for assessing students with dyslexia, and then instruction. What do we do in terms of providing instruction? And then there's 9 appendices, and they have a wealth of information. It talks about the sources of laws and rules for dyslexia, the identification and listings of rules and procedures. Then they have important questions and answers that you might have, others have had. They have a definition of terms. They have training providers and dyslexia contacts at the Education Service Center. Okay. One thing that can be very, very confusing for people is, what is dyslexia? I mean, some people say, oh, does that mean that they write their S's backwards, or what is dyslexia? And we know a lot of children will do that, and they'll move on through that. Dyslexia is not something that you can do that's really easy to diagnose, because they look at a variety of things in terms of making a decision, and a lot of people are part of a team that look at this. And it does require careful consideration. But we know it's a specific learning disability that's neurological in origin. We know that it's manifested by difficulty in learning to read words fluently, decode words, or be able to see a word and understand and figure it out even if it's an unknown word, and spell well, even though, and here's the thing, so they have these difficulties, but the child has received effective classroom instruction. So it's not a matter of not having a good teacher in kindergarten or first grade. They received effective instruction. The child is of adequate intelligence, so it's not that. They've had socio-cultural opportunity, so it's not a matter of a child who maybe missed a lot of school because their parents were around, and I was in several schools during first grade. It wouldn't be a matter of a child that's an English learner. Okay, although children who are English learners could have dyslexia, so I mean, it gets kind of, like I say, complicated. But we know this, that these difficulties result from a phonological component of language that is unexpected in view of all these other things. And that's the key. Because I remember when I first heard about dyslexia and I saw characteristics, I'm going, well, this could be an English learner, or this could be a child who just didn't have good instruction. And all that is true. So we have to kind of look at a lot of things that are going on in that child's experiences before we can say, oh, this child has dyslexia, okay? But I want to say this. Increasingly, the state feels that early diagnosis is critical. And they really want us, if you have any concerns or any questions, it's better to go ahead and talk to someone, refer the child, and get help than to wait, because the longer we wait, the more these children suffer and fall behind and behind and behind. So it's not, so that's something that has been really emphasized in the more recent handbook. More and more. Okay. So here's some characteristics of children who have dyslexia. They have difficulty reading words in isolation. That means when they see a word in isolation, they have to look at just the code. They cannot use surrounding words to figure it out. So that would, they also have trouble decoding unfamiliar words. So they might know the word cat because they have a cat at home and they've seen that in cat food on a bag, but they wouldn't be able to necessarily then read pat because it's an unfamiliar word. Okay, so again, that decoding. Their oral reading is slow, it's inaccurate or labored, and they have difficulty with spelling. Now, a lot of people are not as prone to being a good speller. Maybe they have stronger auditory memory than visual memory. But again, this would show up as something that seems unexpected in view of the child succeeding in other ways, okay? So it's one of the factors. Okay, here are the reading spelling characteristics. They have trouble segmenting, blending, and manipulating sounds and words, and they have trouble with phonemic awareness. And I want to remind you what that is. We've talked about that when we took this 4376. But phonemes relates to the sound system of language. Phonemes. Phonemic awareness is the ability to be able to hear or be aware of sounds and words. This is not phonics. Phonics is letter-sound correspondence. Phonemic awareness is being able to hear a word and recognize that there are how many sounds, for example, are in a word. Okay? Now, why is this important? Well, when we speak, children learn to speak, and they will say a word, and they might say, oh, look, there's that cat. And they're thinking about that animal, the cat, and they can say cat and learn, you know, and pronounce it correctly. But they do not have to be aware of how many sounds are in cat. So if we say cat, how many sounds are in it? 3. Okay. So it's important in learning to read, however. We found that this is a real critical predictor of success in learning to read, because the extent to which you can hear 3 sounds, then when you're trying to read a word, you try to account for those sounds. All right? And so in alphabetic language like English or Spanish, we use letters to represent sounds. So kids have to be able to hear those sounds and be aware of how many sounds are in a word to account for them. But again, this all happens. This is an oral language thing. This is not phonics. Phonics is letters and sounds. But of course, it's laying the foundations of that. So we have found that Connie Jewell did research, maybe 30 years ago, and found out that there were children receiving phonics instruction every day in first grade, and yet they weren't learning to read successfully. And what she found out was the problem is they did not have phonemic awareness. So now this is being increasingly emphasized. So it will be on your exam. They'll ask something about that. You'll want to know what are the aspects of it. Okay. So there's different types of phonemic awareness abilities. One is segmenting. So for example, you'll be able to see the word cat, and you'll be able to segment that take it apart, and be able to account for the 3 sounds. So like when a child is doing invented spelling, and they put K-A-T, it's not spelled correctly, but they are demonstrating phonemic awareness and the ability to segment. So that's a good thing, okay? Blending, that's where you would say something like this. We'll get in this in a minute. Mr. Lyon talks real slowly. Let's see if we can figure out what he says. And he says, cup, act. What word did Mr. Lyon say? Okay, so we're asking the child to blend the sounds, okay? And notice, this is all oral language. It's not print. We're not adding print to it at this point. Okay, and then manipulating sounds and words. So for example, I'm going to say cat, and now I'm going to take off the first sound, and I'm going to add another sound. Okay, so I had a cat, now I'm going to take off, add but. What do you get? Bat. Okay, let's take off the but, and let's add and they say hat. These same things, so any kind of manipulation. Okay. Learning names of letters and corresponding sounds. Now we're getting into the initial part of phonics. Okay? And so that would be something else that you might see that they have more difficulty with. Phonological memory, or holding information about letters and sounds in memory, and those are those things like I just said. Like for example, other kids are getting it. When I say Mr. Lyon talks slowly, and they can do that. They can hold those sounds in memory, but maybe a child with dyslexia would have trouble with that. Rapid naming, or recalling the names of familiar objects, colors, or letters. So for example, being able to look at the colors that you just talked about. What color is this? And red and blue. And other kids can get that, but they have difficulty remembering. So, those are the primary characteristics. These are secondary. If we don't go in and help these children early on, then problems start developing later on. So, if a child has difficulty dealing with the code and actually saying words, well, obviously they're going to have trouble with comprehension. So that's going to happen because they're having to process the text so slowly, they cannot hold in information in short-term memory and process that text. So you'll see kids maybe in 3rd and 4th grade are really big, problems with comprehension, or even earlier on. They'll have difficulty with aspects of written composition. Well, if you have trouble with spelling, you can imagine how that's going to hinder your fluency in writing. They're not going to spend much time reading and writing. It's really unpleasant to do it. They're failing. They do not feel good about it. So they're not going to get those benefits that come along with that, like gaining vocabulary. Because there's words that we encounter when we read that we don't encounter when we talk. These kids could end up having a limited vocabulary. They also won't be spending a lot of time dealing with written language, so they don't really know how written language works. So when they're asked to respond to a writing task in 4th grade or for the state exam, they don't know much about how written language works. They don't really understand that. How that's different than the elliptical oral language that they're used to. And of course, the sad thing probably too is the low self-esteem, depression, and anger. So a lot of your kids, as they fail early on in school, like they've been in there for day after day for 9 months, and they're not succeeding. It's all very strange to them. They feel like a stranger in a strange world. And then they start not wanting to be a part of it. And it doesn't take too long before these kids don't want to try at all. And a lot of times these kids will come across as maybe being lazy, but it's not lazy. They just don't want to try because if I don't try, then I don't fail. If I try, I might just fail. So I tried a long time ago and I just couldn't get it. So then they start disengaging. So you start getting all of this that could be in behavioral problems. So when we talk about students in 4th grade through high school, sadly, some of these children have gone through all this time and they don't get the help they need. And that's why the state's so concerned about this. So you might have students that have dyslexia that have a long history of reading and writing difficulties. They might want to avoid reading aloud. You might see that. They read materials very slowly. They have inadequate vocabulary. And they have difficulty spelling. Now, not every student that has these characteristics necessarily has dyslexia. Remember, It's a combination of things. If they've had good instruction, what about their intelligence? What about the sociocultural factors? All of that goes into it. But these are all indicators of things that you might see later on. Okay, so if you're not sure, it'd be better to get help and ask someone to look at this student to see what we can do to help them. Okay. Again, schools should not delay identification and intervention until 2nd or 3rd grade. It used to be try different things out, and they even go through RTI and want to go through all of those procedures, and now they're saying no, early on, just let's get help. Again, these are state and federal requirements, and a district will typically evaluate for dyslexia through Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. On the other hand, if the student is suspected of having a disability within the scope of the Individuals with Disabilities Act of 2004, all special education procedures must be followed. And you might go, I'm not a special education teacher, what do I do? The point is that you need to go to people in the school and get referrals and get help with this. And they owe it to this child to do it. I mean, it's the law. This is not like, oh, this would be a nice thing. No, we need to do this. We do need to do it, but it's also the law. So that's why it's serious. In Texas, most dyslexia identification takes place through general education. Tiered intervention is not required, nor should it delay the identification. It used to be different. They would say go through RTI and then let's see, but now they're saying no, we do not have to do that for dyslexia. Parents are notified of the proposals to assess for dyslexia and may grant permission. And parents can actually request this. So if the school is delaying for some reason, parents have a right to request that their child be assessed. Okay. So, yeah, what if the parent doesn't get permission? You know, from what it sounds like, they have to be able to give permission. And that's a tricky thing, because some parents do not want their child labeled. Okay? So I think in that case, what I would do as a classroom teacher is be honest. Honestly, there's things we can do to make a difference. In fact, in our case study, like using the spelling strategy we use, we've helped a lot of kids that have dyslexia who've never been able to read before. So I think there's much we can do as classroom teachers. And I know there is special dyslexia training, and I'm not trying to underestimate the value of that, but I've worked a lot with children with dyslexia, and things like what we did in the case study do work, and having more, giving them more time and attention. And I think that's what I would try to do. I mean, some parents, they love their child, and they don't realize that they're really hurting their child by not giving special help, but they don't want the child to be labeled. And maybe they were labeled themselves in some way, and they felt bad. You just never know what the history is there. But I think that doesn't mean we write this child off, and we don't say, oh, I'm not a dyslexia specialist, so I can't help this child. Yes, we can. There have been many children who have been taught by rigor in the general education classrooms, and we've got other, so we can do that. I think it's just, So, I met some people from New Zealand when they brought Reading Recovery up here in the United States, which is a program for children who have difficulty learning to read in first grade. They would diagnose them and give them special help. And the woman told me, she said, we don't have children, we don't have special education in New Zealand. And I thought, you don't? She said, no, we don't have any students in special ed. And I thought, wow. And she goes, we don't label them that. We all work with them all in the classroom and give them help. Now, I'm not trying to undermine the importance of special education, but I've seen a lot of children not help. Teachers say, I can't help that child. I teach 4th grade. He reads on 2nd grade level. That's not, I don't know what to do. And that's not what we're licensed. We're getting licensed to be able to teach all children in pre-K through grade 6. So that's what we need to do. And that's how we have to look at it. Again, as I talked about at the very beginning, there'll be a committee that will look at a child and diagnosis, but they're going to look at a variety of things, because they're going to try to make sure that the child's had adequate instruction. They're going to look at the child's attendance. They're going to look at whether the child's an English learner and so on. And so if the student exhibits poor performance in reading and writing, the committee will examine data to determine if these difficulties are, and here's the key word, unexpected in in relation to the student's other abilities, the socio-cultural factors, language difference, irregular attendance, or lack of effective instruction. So these things can all be, these are all things that could be contributing factors. Early intervention is best, as I've kind of emphasized, for older students also can benefit from focused instruction. And districts are to purchase or develop a reading program for students with dyslexia and related disorders that incorporates all the critical components. So in the state of Texas, districts are required to do that and to address these needs. Okay, so what are the critical components? The phonological awareness. And phonological awareness is kind of a big umbrella term for phonemic awareness. And again, it's the awareness of sounds and words. And if you look at the progression, it starts with things like being able to listen to a sentence and recognize the individual words. There's things like rhyming words. And then we get into listening, like I said before, listening to a word and being able to be aware of the individual sounds within words, and that's what phonemic awareness is. There's phonics instruction. We get into kids knowing about how to break words down into syllables, and that's another thing that we help them with, which gets into structural analysis, which we've talked about before. Orthography, which relates to spelling, and looking at patterns and seeing patterns in words, and understanding when words do not follow the phonics generalization, so we work on that. Morphology, which is another term that's related to structural analysis, where we have root words and we have prefixes and suffixes, or it can also get into like Latin and Greek roots and derivations of words. So we help kids see common things about words and how to break them down. Syntax relates to how words go together in a sentence and how we would put them together in reading English, so that if I said, I will ride to school on the blank, we would know it would be a thing, because the in English signals that to us. So it's an understanding, we would use that to help us. We work on reading comprehension, fluency, writing, including composing, and being able to also use conventions, spelling, punctuation, usage. Okay, phonological awareness. And this is, again, the state's really big on this, and because of the links of this to being able to read successfully. So the definition of it is the ability to hear and manipulate the sound structure of language. It's an umbrella term for being able to hear sounds at the word level, like cat, the syllable level. There's no like walking. It's got two parts to it, so we might ask children, walking, let's tap for each syllable to be able to hear that. And at the phoneme level, the individual sound. So what are some things that this relates to? Rhyming words. So that's why when you do share poetry with children, you're really developing phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, because when they listen to poems, they're naturally going to be sensitive to the rhyming words. Not all poems have rhyming words, but a lot of the ones that we would share with young children do. Being able to segment sentences into individual words, segment words into syllables, and segment syllables into sounds. So the progression goes from the larger units of language, from the sentence, down to the word level, down to the syllable level, down to the phoneme level. And one of the early things that children are able to do, of course, is be able to listen to hear rhyming words. Okay. So here's some terminology that you need to know about. The sentence, well, we know kind of what a sentence is, but the sun is in the sky, that would be the sentence. And syntax is, again, it's how we put, it's a linguistic term, how we put words together in a language, what can go together. Word, sun is also a morpheme, because it cannot be broken down into a smaller, meaningful unit. So a morpheme of a word is, when we look at like structural analysis and word parts, it's the unit that would carry meaning, the smallest unit. Okay? Syllables would be like sun is one syllable, but sunny would be two syllables, and sunshine would be two syllables, and you can also see how that would be a compound word. And then another term that they use in talking about instruction is onset and rhymes. And rhymes, the rhymes is where they typically, you'll see that it starts with a vowel, like in run, and then the onset is the R sound. Okay, so fun, the onset would be F, and the rhyme would be the UN or the un part. In cat, the onset would be the K sound, and the AT or the act would be the rhyme. And then phonemes are like we talked about before, the 3 individual sounds. So this is all the terminology that they want you to know about, and they may say, well, a teacher is doing this, what is she focusing on? And they want you to know, oh, that's onset and rhyme. So that's what they want to be talking about. Okay. Noted aspects. Again, phonemes are sounds of the smallest unit of language. Phonemic awareness is an understanding that spoken words are made up of sequence of sounds. SIP has 3 phonemes. SHIP also has 3 phonemes. And that's what's tricky for people. Because you go, SHIP, that's got 4 letters. But SHIP has 3 phonemes. So you've got to be thinking about that. They might ask you that. So it's essential for any kind of alphabetic language because these languages represent speech through letters. Same thing with Spanish. Some languages, they don't represent language that way. So you can have a scholar in that language who has weak phonemic awareness because you only develop that and need that really to read an alphabetic language. We're not born with it necessarily. You can be very intelligent, but it's something you need to acquire an alphabetic language, and it's also developed as you start dealing with an alphabetic language. Okay. Phonics is relating sounds and letters. How the phonemic awareness is necessary for phonics. And if you don't understand that a word is made up of individual sounds, phonics instruction isn't going to even really make sense to a child. And that's why they've had kids that their whole year, every day of the school year, got phonics instruction, and they still failed to learn to read because they didn't have phonemic awareness. Here are some ways that you can develop phonemic awareness. And this, to me, these are really great ways to do it. One is through advanced spelling. So when we have children going to a writing center in kindergarten, and they're spelling it the best way they can, how they write the way a kindergartner does, some people go, oh, that's not spelled correctly. They're learning it the wrong way. No, we actually find out that this is really great because they're developing phonemic awareness. So when that child says macaroni and puts mac-K, and then and puts a R, macaro, and then macaroni, and then puts the E. To write macaroni, and they go through all of that, they're developing phonemic awareness. And they're doing it in a meaningful way. So that invented spelling is really, we find out that kids that do invented spelling actually end up acquiring conventional spelling better because they're developing phonemic awareness. Reading aloud and shared reading of poetry is also another great way to develop phonemic awareness because a lot of those, like when we say, white clouds, we read the poem, it goes, white sheep on a blue hill. When the wind stops, you all stand, the child's going to be predicting still. You see, so they're automatically listening for hill and still. So we're not saying, oh, this is a rhyming word, we're just developing. So a lot of kids are going to get this before they ever come to school, because their parents are going to read loud poetry. A lot of our kids don't, and they're counting on us. So those things are all very, very beneficial. At the same time, kids really love doing it. Some other phonemic awareness skills would be sound and word discrimination. What word doesn't belong with the others? Can, man, bat, ran. And so the child would say bat. That's what we want the children to say. Now I want to say something about all of these kind of activities. You need to model it and demonstrate it 2 or 3 times and give them the answer so they understand what the task is. Sometimes they don't give you the answer that's correct, not because they couldn't give you the correct answer, they don't know what the task is. So you've got to model that before you start saying, oh, they don't have phonemic awareness. Well, they just don't understand the task. Even saying these words rhyme, You have to understand what rhyme means to be able to say whether a word rhymes. And this is what we see a lot of times teachers don't do. They just get into the task without modeling it. Okay, so again, rhyming words is another one. Another one is syllable splitting. And there we're getting into those onsets and rhymes. So the onset of man is the rhyme is and. So we might ask kids to split those, or we might say and. What would we, let's blend that together and they would say man. And again, there's the blending part. And we might break it down into 3 sounds, and. Okay, so another term and activity you'll need to know about is called phonemic segmentation. Now think about it this way. Blending is taking sounds and blending them together. Segmenting is giving a word and asking them to break it up into segments. That's the difference. So in this case, we would say, listen to this word, cat, and you tell me the sounds that you hear. So there we want them to segment. And they would go, act. Okay, so we can do those activities, or we can let children also do things like doing different spelling. When they're trying to spell words, they're going to naturally segment. They'll say the words themselves and then try to represent them. Phoneme deletion is where, what is cat without the k? Now, notice when you see that thing where there's a letter and it's in brackets like that, that means they're talking about the sound, not the name of the letter. So you wouldn't say, what is cat without the K? You would say, what is cat without the K? So phonemic awareness, we're talking strictly about kids hearing words and sounds, not letters and sounds. That's phonics. And this plays a role, but that's not what we're doing right now. Okay, phoneme manipulation. What would you have if you changed the t in cat to an And so there again, that's phoneme manipulation. Listening to a word, taking out a sound, adding something else at the beginning or the middle or the end. And you can see that's more advanced than like blending. Okay. As we've already talked about, segmentation is needed to be able to spell. So if a child cannot segment, then they're going to have difficulty in being able to spell. So if a student will be unable to understand that sunshine can be pulled apart into sun and to shine, or that sun can be broken down into 3 sounds. So instruction can begin with segmenting the initial sounds of words, next the ending sounds, and then the middle. In learning anything about words, kids always pay attention more first to the beginning sound, then they tend to hear or notice the ending sound, and then the middle. That's kind of the order of the. So what is the first sound in sun? And they would say segmentation for learners who cannot talk. The instructor says the sound of S, not the letter, only the sound. So they would say the sound of S, and first models the process of what to do before asking the learner to do the task. So they would say, listen to the sound, look at the pictures, provided as possible responses, and then segments the initial phoneme of each word depicted by the picture, such as the S from the beginning of sun, the N from nut, and the M from mom. So they cannot talk, you can use pictures, but you need to again model that for them in terms of which picture would represent what you're doing. Segmenting is needed for spelling, blending. Sounds is needed for being able to read words. So playing the pictures also could be done in assessing and fostering practice in blending. Blending and segmentation can be more fun with puppets who talk to the children. So for example, Mr. Lyon says words very slowly. Try to figure out what he's saying today. Okay, so the children say, what is Mr. Lyon's trying to tell us now? Sun. So they're going to, or listen to which picture Mr. Lyon So then you would go s, and so you would show 3 pictures or so, and then they would tell which picture was relying on those. So, and the thing about any of these activities is you should be looking at with your school district in terms of a regular type of program. It's best if children would do a little bit of practice on a daily basis. And of course, do you notice all those words are one-syllable words? They're easy, or it starts with that and then it gets more complicated. But the point is maybe doing a little bit every day, dealing with different word families or onsets and rhymes so that they get exposure. Because if you just did this once a week or once every 2 weeks, then it's not going to be very helpful. So, this is another thing that they talk about is continuous sounds that can be elongated and held continuously, like A, E, F, I, L. And they emphasize this, that it's easier for children to blend sounds that can be held continuously, so start with these. Some cannot be elongated or held continuously. And so the way I kind of do this in my mind is that, like, when you say the sound for B, but, you can see how it kind of has that up at the end instead of up, as opposed to which doesn't change. Y'all see that slight difference? So a lot of people feel like it's best to start with those that can be held continuously. So if they had that on the test, the best I could say is kind of be sort of familiar with this and know kind of how to distinguish them. But I think that to me is kind of a common sense way to do that. It's kind of too much of a burden to remember on problems. Okay, orthography and spelling. Orthography is the conventional spelling system of a language. Learners need to see the patterns and regularities. And we did this when we, in 4376, when you developed your spelling curriculum around phonics generalizations. Like, for example, if we start with short A words, and they understand how you make short A words, with that consonant, vowel, consonant, and they start seeing those patterns, and we show them word families, like, we have cat, let's take off the C and add a B, and we get bat. If we take off the B and add an F, we get fat. Now we're starting to see the regularities. It's a lot of burden for children if they have to, every word becomes just a new word. If we can see regularities, those patterns, like the phonics generalizations that work, then kids are not having to look at each word as a new word to be learned. If I know fat, then if I know can, and then I see cat, and I've never seen it before, I can learn by analogy. I know the sound of C, and I can put it with AT, and I can come up with that word. And that's what we want to show kids, those word families and regularities. So weekly spelling list should focus on words that have the exact same element of phonics, like we've talked about before, like a whole week, or maybe even more on the short A words, where we show them those families. Okay? But also we have to include the high frequency words. And because many of them cannot be sounded out. They have irregular spellings. And those are because they're high frequency, they need to know them because they're going to occur a lot when they read. So they can't sit there and struggle with those, or their fluency breaks down and their comprehension. They also need words that they'll want to use when they write. So we want them to be confident and know that they can spell those words and not feel like they can't do it, or that they'll be ashamed. So you've got to be very systematic about looking at what you're doing with your spelling instruction. Morphology is the study of how a base or root word, a prefix and suffix combine to form words. And morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. Again, it's a linguistic term. And word lists need to focus on generalizations for word parts and derivations, so kids can start seeing these regularities. So we start with things like walking, and help them see that. And then later on, as they get more advanced, we can take Latin roots and Greek roots and develop their vocabulary. We also have to think about comprehension from the very beginning, and I think this is where a lot of programs suffer. They focus so much on getting the kids to say the words and deal with the code don't do anything with comprehension. And that's why we have the 3rd and 4th grade slump. We've got a lot of kids who are doing pretty good in school, making progress in 1st and 2nd grade, but across the country, and you can even look at our state scores, we call it the 3rd and 4th grade slump. They start going down and scores really badly in 3rd and 4th grade. Why? Because now we don't have those short little stories with the little pictures that you can look at the pictures to get the meaning. Now we have to follow this long text. And what happens on page 1 is going to impact what's happening on page 5. And we've got to be able to string all that together. And in our oral language situations, kids don't get that practice. Everything is elliptical. And, and even when they're writing, by sending text messages, it's very elliptical. And then all of a sudden they have to read paragraph after paragraph, and they don't know what to do with that. So you've got to start developing comprehension from the very beginning, and the way to do that is to read aloud to kids. And if you read aloud, they'll start learning how to process longer and longer units of written language. And it'll start happening very quickly if you do it daily. A lot of people don't realize that. And reading aloud quality literature shows students what books offer, and that reading can be rewarding. And if the teachers focus just on skills, they're not going to see why skills matter. And I'm really convinced a lot. When I was at the University of Texas at Austin County, did this seminal study on phonemic awareness. And I knew a lot about some of those schools where she was, and I can tell you a lot of those teachers, but all they were doing is phonics instruction. And maybe some kind of guidance, maybe some kind of small group instruction. They weren't reading aloud with kids. So a lot of those kids were not, they don't really see a reason for learning to read. If you just go in and say, this is a B, go buck, you don't even know why you're doing that. If someone's not reading aloud to you, or you're not doing shared reading, you don't understand how all these parts even fit together. So we've got to expose our kids to real reasons for using language. They need to be reading aloud, they need to be using shared reading experiences every day, so that when they're learning phonics, and they're learning how to spell words, they see how this fits in together. They need to have writing centers where kids are writing and sharing their messages with each other. Because if you just focus on the parts, it's not going to work. And this is true with kids with dyslexia too. They need that too. They just need more time. So, you also, in your guided reading, there's many things that you can do to help kids with dyslexia and all your other students too. Help them, before they start reading the story, help them be prepared for the tricky parts. Don't send them out to read a story that's not at their instructional level. We're just setting them up to fail. And if that passage is so difficult for that child that it's not at their instructional level, you need to be using shared reading with those kids where they read it with you. And until they can get to where they have a sight vocabulary where they can read it on their own. You can also, with children that have trouble with dyslexia, instead of saying, go read the story now, just break it down into shorter segments. Introduce the tricky parts and say, let's read this part here silently, then let's talk about what we just learned. So break it down into shorter segments, especially with science and social studies, because that's true of all children. And again, model kind of retelling what you just read. So eventually kids will get to where they understand that when they read, they're supposed to be thinking about the meaning, and gradually they'll be able to process longer and longer segments of text. But they need help. And most of the time we're not doing this sort of thing. We're teaching kind of to those kids, the top kids and the middle kids. So, and then with the other kids, we're not doing anything sometimes. They're not reading texts. They're not reading textbooks. They're not reading any stories, or anything longer than just a short passage. So they never can get better. Science and social studies. This is an area where all kids need help. But we know that our English learners and kids with dyslexia or other kind of reading difficulties especially suffer. So we need to be doing reading with the kids with this, not just saying, go read this and go answer these questions, or go look up these definitions of words and calling that teaching. So we need to help them see how to use the headings and subheadings to organize their understanding. And this, I'm sure, will be on your exam also, because they want you to know about how to teach in the content areas. And again, if we could look at the heading, we go, okay, so boys and girls, like today we're going to learn about segmentation. paragraph. I want you to let's read this and talk about what we learned about sedimentary rocks from this paragraph. And you can read and then kind of retell, and you can even model, let them dictate and write down within notes and model note taking. And again, then you develop a list of ideas, and then the next day you go back and you go, boys and girls, today we're going to read about metamorphic rocks. But before we do, let's read what we learned about sedimentary rocks. You see what I'm saying? So we are helping them process the text, and we're providing scaffolding. But you already know how to read textbooks, you know, so what it is it's showing them and providing demonstrations. And most of the time, it's not taught this way. And a lot of kids who are very motivated and who are strong readers will succeed in spite of no teaching or poor teaching. But our kids that have got dyslexia or English learners, they're really counting on us. But really the other kids are too. And there's a lot of kids that end up making C's and D's in their first courses in college. They could be making A's and D's if they know how to read the textbook. Nobody ever taught them. So, it's really important. For literature, we treat it differently, and we can have genuine conversations about what they've read. You can share your personal response like you did in your case study and talk about stories and think about bigger ideas. Again, reading aloud daily, and along with shared reading, you should have shared writing every day. The children dictate to you, and you write down what they say to model what it is when we write. So, for example, boys and girls, let's talk about, today we learned about, even kindergarten today, we learned about the sense of sight today. So what were some things that we learned? Can you tell me? And so they dictate and you write down. I'm going to write this down so we don't forget. So as they say something, you write it and say each word, and you go back and you point each word and let's read it together. So what they're saying is, what I think about, I can say. What I say can be written down. And what I write down, I can read and somebody else can read. So you're modeling that whole process for kids, which makes this a lot easier for those kids but for all kids, but especially those who are struggling. So you want, writing development is really suffered in our country. We know that a lot of teachers do not teach writing every day, which always is amazing to me because we would never think of not teaching math each day in elementary school. But there's many people that are doing nothing with writing. And so if you don't have practice with it, it's going to be really bad for any child student. And that's why the majority of the kids in the United States do not write at a proficient level. We know that from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. But you can see how it's going to really hurt those students who struggle with dyslexia, because they've already got the fear of even trying. So we want to talk about, we want to have a writing workshop where we deal with composing and getting ideas down and having rough drafts. And then when we get to the publishing stage, where we're going to share it with somebody else, then we have an editing or publishing conference. So that those kids realize, it's okay. I'm just going to start the best way I can in my rough draft. I just want to get my ideas in. And my teacher will help me with the the editing part, so I won't be embarrassed when my writing is shared. Okay, so these are things we can do to help kids not be, learn and actually feel better about writing. Another thing about writing that's important that we learned about is having writing conferences, which is up on that other thing, that other slide. Not just leaving kids to do it all on their own as they're having writing rough drafts. Each day, make sure you go around and meet with certain students so that by the end of the week, you touch base with all the kids to help them, think of ideas to write about and get ideas down so they're not just left to do that on their own. So, in terms of writing development, we want to focus upon establishing content first, learning about proofreading and the spelling and spelling, punctuation, and usage when they're publishing conference. And the great thing about a writing workshop is that when they ask you to provide for differentiated instruction, so like what are you going to do for your kids with dyslexia? How are you going to differentiate instruction? Well, writing workshop actually does that. Because every child is writing where they are. And we know that in a writing workshop, the only rule is that after we have a mini lesson, kids go and write. And the rule is that everybody writes. And when you finish start a new piece. So if he's spending 3 days writing about his fishing trip with his grandfather, that's okay. Because she only spent 1 day on her piece, but she's already written 2 others, and that's okay as long as we're all writing. So we provide natural differentiation. Some children are going to naturally be more capable than others, but that's okay. That's why we have writing conferences, and we can help those kids, you know, through meeting them individually. And also, if you start a writing program and you write daily, like we really are supposed to according to our curriculum in the state, then we can start off with personal narratives. And then as the school year goes on, we can help kids learn more about writing informal reports or reports. We can get into teaching kids how to take notes and how to combine notes. And we can talk also to get, you know, writing poetry and even writing fiction. But we can build upon that. And we also can do writing naturally in other areas of curriculum. You know, kids can keep logs as they watch their plant growing. They can, you know, like I said, we can take notes as we're reading in our science and social studies textbook. And so there's many ways that we can use writing across the curriculum. When we talk about dyslexia instruction, one thing they're going to talk about is multisensory, where we deal with listening, the writing, and the visual. And when we use the spelling strategy in 4376, I'm convinced that's one reason that works so well, and it's helped so many kids with dyslexia, because they're using all of that. You know, they're saying it, they're pointing each letter, they're closing their eyes, they're trying to visualize it, and then they're actually writing. So, systematic and cumulative instruction is best, moving from the easiest to the more complex, and I think the key here is systematic. Starting with something easier and gradually building upon it rather than throwing too much at kids at one time. And concepts need to be reviewed systematically. So if you just go in there one day and you're going to talk about short A words, and then you're not going to do anything else with that for another week or 2 because it's not systematic, little is going to be gained. Now, we have to do things systematically and build upon them. But that's why when we talk about a spelling curriculum, every week we have a list of words. It's going to focus on phonics generalization. It's going to have some sight words, and we're going to gradually build. So after a while, kids are going to know 150 high frequency words, and they're going to also know many phonics generalizations because we've gradually built that. When you see kids that are missing words on the spelling test, you don't just ignore that. You write that down and you go back and you reteach. So that's what we're talking about, being systematic. Not just going out there and throwing some information out there and hoping people catch it. Because it really won't work with these kids. And actually it doesn't work with a lot of other kids either. Again, we need to be very explicit. And here is a key thing to all good instruction. And that last point. The teacher models the task. I do and you watch. Then the teacher provides guided practice. Let's do it together. You help me. And then I'm going to watch you do it and see how well you do it. And maybe that means you do it with a buddy, but I'm going to walk around and make sure y'all are getting it. And we do this before we ask children to do something on their own. Most of the time we give a few examples and then say go out and do it. And we miss so many kids that way. This is the essence of good teaching. It's best for all of us. Some of us remember a situation where we were hired at a job and they gave us this real brief training on how to use the cash register or something. Well, really, I don't really know. I need more practice, right? So we all need this when we're encountering new information. I do, you watch, that's the demonstration. Let's do it together. You help me. Let's do this together. And you do it, and I'm going to watch you to see if you need more help. And then you do it on your own. And it may not happen in the same day. It may take a week before they get to the independent practice. It depends on what they know and how difficult the skill is. But then they'll learn it. Okay, so accommodations for this children's dyslexia. How can you put this in your lesson plan? You can provide more time. You can decide not to penalize for incorrect spelling, for example, on rough drafts, which I think you should for anybody anyway. Let students in the class engage in buddy reading at work. I mean, that is a great way to help kids. They love it. And they all learn from that. Okay? Some reason we think everybody's distributing individually, but we're really supposed to be helping them learn it. If they can learn that way, then we're using time wisely. Provide notes and model note-taking. Again, like I talked about, so they have ways to study information. Provide spelling instruction in school where you can teach and monitor. You can use the spelling strategy, teach kids how to do it, have a center where kids go do that to each other, and help each other. Provide time in the classroom for kids to learn spelling words. We know a lot of parents are not going to call out spelling words at home. Even our mainstream professional parents nowadays, a lot of them do not want to help with homework. So if we want kids to learn to spell those words, that's our responsibility. We can make that happen in our classroom. We do not have to let kids suffer because they have parents that are not engaged with this. So, provide oral reading of directions for kids with dyslexia, make sure they understand. Check on accommodations for state testing. So you need to find out about that for your kids that have dyslexia. Find out what can may happen within your school building. Okay. The good news. Dyslexia is a lifelong condition. However, with proper help, many people with dyslexia can learn to read and write well. Early identification and treatment is the key to helping individuals with dyslexia achieve in school and life. And I'll just as a reminder, I know those of you who took children's literature, remember Jerry King, that fabulous, successful illustrator, one of the best artists in our country. He suffered from dyslexia. So did Patricia Polacco. The difference was in these slides, what the difference was that Patricia Polacco had a teacher when she was about 13 or 14 years old who figured out, now I understand why you had troubles. And that's why she wrote the book to him, thank you, Mr. Faulkner, because he was the person who helped her. And Jerry Peatney credits to having very supportive parents who supported him. So we can go on, people can be very, very successful with dyslexia and have a great life. So that's the difference. So. Anyway, so thank y'all for your time, and I wish y'all the best of luck.